Hello, good evening, and thank you for being here this evening for the very first Building Blocks Talk. I want to start by thanking the team that put this together, the Community Foundation, the ECBB, Connected Elkhart County, Vibrant Communities, and the team at the Impact. Can we please give them a round of applause? This group started Building Blocks Talks as a way to bring great thought leadership and educational opportunities to our community as we develop in a very meaningful way and deploy generational investment in quality of place initiatives. Our hope is that these opportunities challenge our thinking and promote discussion and intention to ensure more positive outcomes for generations to come. I'm going to share a handful of slides to provide additional context for tonight's discussion. Go ahead and read that. I said it a little bit. This is a meme that's intended to be rather funny, but begs a certain level of reflection. 80% of the built environment that we experience today in Elkhart County was built after World War II. In a substantially different pattern than the last 2,000 years of city building. Since then, we've systematically decanted our cities of the 5 attributes that most sew together the social fabric of community. Starting with housing in the 1950s, office parks, cultural and civic assets in the bottom left corner, schools, Penn Harris Madison was started in 1958, and commerce. 1972, that's opening day at Concord Mall. We know today that that pattern has failed us. Usually you see a single-use facility surrounded by parking. That pattern no longer works. In many ways, in many instances, we've decoupled the outcomes that we seek as a community with the investments that we make. What we're talking about would be shops on 6, Southwood Street, versus Main Street in downtown Elkhart in 1914. This is downtown Elkhart in 1920s, 2nd Street. The only standing building that exists today is City Hall. The rest of these buildings, the Presbyterian Church, the high school, the library, the trees, the sidewalks, the street's been widened, it's all gone. We put together a simple slide to illustrate the economic impact of various development patterns in Elkhart. This is specific to Elkhart. We simply pulled the tax records of these 5 properties, the number of acres, we took the assessed value divided by the number of acres, in order to understand the general efficiency of the development, to produce taxes to support the development. Remember, 80% of what you see in Elkhart was built post-World War II. Walmart by far has the least amount of productivity at $540,000 an acre. As you can see, shops on 6 doubles at $1 million an acre. As we start to change the pattern and head into a neighborhood, you see the numbers substantially increase. The new Martins in the River District, $1.8 million per acre. The new apartments in the River District, $3.4 million an acre. But the one that actually generated the most economic productivity for our community was torn down this past year. It was built in the 1800s, which is 119 South Main Street. Coming in at $5.125 million per acre, 10 times the productivity, economic productivity of Walmart, 5 times that of shops on 6. Why does this matter? Besides the unbelievable economic difference in productivity, the next generation chooses place over paycheck nearly 100% of the time. It's our hope that together we can continue to invest in a manner in which future generations, their first choice is Elkhart County, to stay here and to invest alongside us. I want to thank you and introduce John Hunsberger, who will introduce Chuck Marohn. John.
Good evening. I'm John Hunsberger, Executive Director for the Elkhart County Convention and Visitors Bureau. I just want to take a quick survey. How many of you are from Elkhart County? Just raise your hands. Okay, good portion of you. How many of you are from outside of Elkhart County? Good, a few hands. Good. I'm here to introduce Chuck Marohn. He is the president and founder of Strong Towns. I'm going to be brief about this introduction, so you can read his bio at some point after this meeting. There's two critical things that I really want you to know about Chuck. Not only is he educated in urban planning with his undergraduate degree, he also has a master's in civil engineering. Those are two critical things to understand. Number one reason, urban planning is about human experience in the urban environment. It can be the rural environment, but it's all about human experience. Civil engineering is about that built environment where that experience happens. And to be able to have that type of education and lifelong experience and talk about how they work together creates a unique empathy when you talk about these issues. So much of what David has already shared about the economic impact and the value that planning and development has on our communities, the human experience also has a value. And it's important to have an empathy for those specific values of that experience when you talk about the issue. So it's not an abstract idea to talk about built environment or quality of place. It's real, it's tangible. It's how we live our lives, and it's how we can better each other's lives together. So with that, please help me welcome Chuck Marohn to the stage.
All right. Thank you, everybody. This has been a fantastic day. I have to say, I'm going to set this on the floor because this is slanted, and I don't want to lose my diet undue. I come from the city of Brainerd, Minnesota, and for those of you that have never been, I will describe it in glowing terms. It's my hometown. I love it. It's a beautiful place. It's a place of magic and wonderful people and all kinds of lakes and forests and beauty, and it's wonderful. But in reality, it's a very real city, and it's a city that has struggles. We tend to lead the state in unemployment. Every time those figures are released, we lead the state in beautiful buildings that we've torn down for parking lots. We lead the state in many things that you wouldn't want to. And there are days when I look at my community and I'm just kind of sickened almost. Like, what have we done? This place should be so much better. Why didn't I? I went to school, I came back. My wife and I met in junior high and dated all through high school and college and came back to our hometown. And there's days when we look at each other, why do we live here? Why do we live here? And I come to a place like this, and let me start off on maybe like not the best foot. Elkhart has a lot of struggles, right? Like, you have a lot of struggles, a lot of things that are difficult that you're working on, and you're like, oh, I wish this could be better. But the thing that I got over and over and over and over again today is how much people love this place, and how much they care about it, and how much, despite the struggles, despite the things that we're working through, there's a reason why we live here. And maybe that reason isn't obvious to people from the outside coming in. Maybe that reason isn't obvious in a postcard or a brochure. But for people that live here, you just know it. And it was fascinating to me today. I tend to ask people, where are you from? How'd you end up here? And so many people I met today said, I'm from here, I'm born and raised here, like I grew up here, I live here. Maybe I went away, but I came back. And a lot of people said, I'm not from here, I'm from around here or somewhere remote, but I married someone who was from here, we came here, we chose to be here. But over and over and over again, it was just reflecting to me that the thing that is making your place special is not a park or a building or a business or an opportunity or the chance to get rich. It's all of you. All of you actually caring about a place. So it's been a very special day to me to hear that and to spend some time kind of reflecting on my own place too, because I struggle sometimes to explain why I love living in Brainerd, why I've chosen to go back to this city that doesn't love me back in many ways and is a very huge disappointment to me in many ways. And it's because, it's my place, right? I know it. I love it. So thank you for sharing that with me throughout this day. I am going to talk a little bit about strong towns tonight. And I want to do this by starting with this. It's not an abstract principle, but with this kind of big picture idea, and then we're going to get more granular. I want to talk about complexity as an idea. I apologize, I'm an engineer or a planner. I promise none of this will be really tough, okay? Complex systems fascinate me. A rainforest is an example of a complex system, right? When we look at a rainforest, we recognize that a rainforest has all kinds of different flora and fauna. They all act independently of each other. When scientists study these things, they recognize that there's a rivalry between different animals, different plants and animals. They rely on each other, but there's also, in a sense, a cooperative environment. We recognize that in a rainforest, there's all kinds of complex interactions going on. There's an order to the rainforest. We can see that as humans, we can look at it, we can see that it has an order to it. But we recognize that the order is not something that was imposed. The order is something that emerges from all these complex interactions. Hold that in your mind. Cities of the past were also, like rainforests, complex adaptive systems. Many people came together, acting in ways that were rivalrous and cooperative, responding to stresses and opportunities, building things, emerging in order. When we look at and study cities of the past, what we see is that they have all of the traits of complex adaptive environments. Complex systems are very different from systems that are complicated. A complicated system, like a Rube Goldberg machine, very, very complicated, right? All kinds of things going on, all these pulleys and levers and blocks and strings. But we recognize that if you cut one of these strings or you move one of these blocks, the Rube Goldberg machine doesn't adapt and change. It just breaks, right? If you have an automobile engine is ridiculously complicated, right? There's a lot of complication with it. But we recognize that if you stress an automobile engine beyond its capacity, it doesn't evolve and adapt and become like a toaster or a wash machine. It just breaks. It just stops working. This is the kind of core difference between systems that are complex and systems that are merely complicated. A complex system has a capacity to evolve and adapt and change, respond to stress and opportunity. Systems that are complicated don't. They simply break when they stop working. So we look at a rainforest, we recognize that if a rainforest gets a lot of rain or an excessive amount of sun in any one season, it doesn't fail, it doesn't go away. It may adapt and evolve, different flora, fauna may become more dominant or less dominant. It remains a rainforest, essentially in the same kind of function and configuration it had before that period of time. But if we look at, say, a cornfield, which is a complicated system to manufacture, in a sense, corn at scale, we recognize that if a cornfield gets too much rain or too much sun in any one season, it doesn't adapt and evolve and become like soybeans or potatoes. It just stops being corn. Right? It just ceases to be what it was designed to be. When we look at human habitat, when we look at the habitat that we build for ourselves, we recognize a distinct shift between a prior development pattern that was based on complexity, kind of an emergent order, everybody working independently and kind of coming together in ways that were cooperative and rivalrous to emerge this order called the city. And the modern approach to development, which is very much about manufacturing the city, a complicated machine, a machine made up of pipes and roads and zoning classifications and financing schemes, all kind of overlaid on top of each other in a very complicated way. Cities of the past, for all of their faults, had the ability to adapt and evolve and change. They were, in a word, strong. Cities that we build today, by design, lack that ability to adapt and evolve. And what we have seen as time goes on is that they become increasingly fragile. This is a prelude to the conversation I want to have tonight. I said I'm from Brainerd, Minnesota. This is what my hometown looked like in 1870. So my city was founded in 1871. It's basically the very first iteration of the city. And you can imagine, some illiterate lumberjacks getting off the train in the middle of nowhere, cutting down some trees, planing out the wood, and putting up these little pop-up shacks, right? Tiny, modest little investments, some hopes and dreams about what the future would provide. We built thousands of cities just like this, all across this continent. And for a variety of reasons that are complex, reasons that defy our ability to project or even to fully understand, a lot of these places just failed. It didn't work out. All of those things that come together to make a city work, it just didn't happen. What happens when a place like this fails? Do we have banks go into default and need government bailouts, right? Do we have unemployment skyrocket? Does the stock market crash? Of course not. None of those things happen. This is what you would call a little bet. It's a tiny little bet by a handful of people on the potential for the future. And when these bets don't work out, the people there salvage what they can. They'll take the iron off and the windows out in this case, and then they move on to the next city, the one that is growing, the one where all those complex variables came together. And when those complex variables come together, what we see over and over and over again, we can look back through all of really human history prior to the 20th century, and we see cities growing in the same kind of pattern. We see them grow in this complex, adaptive way. They will grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. They'll thicken up and mature. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish, right? That is what a complex system looks like. That's what a city would grow like. And so after a generation of that type of growth, my hometown would grow from this street to this street here. This is the same exact street 35 years later. And as my city continued to grow, as more and more people would move here, what we would see is that we continue to grow up, continue to grow out incrementally, and continue to thicken up and become more intense. These 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. This is the incremental development pattern. It is the complex, adaptive way that cities grew for thousands and thousands of years. When we study cities around the world, different continents, different cultures, different latitudes, we see the same thing repeated over and over and over. I sometimes will have people say, well, Chuck, okay, I get it. This is a really cute story about a small town in Minnesota. This really doesn't apply to other cities. I've had to put in some slides to kind of show that maybe it does. So here's another city. I don't know if you'll recognize this one or not, but here is what this one kind of little square looked like in 1878. Here's what it looked like 20 years later. Tell me when you recognize the street. Here it is in 1911, and I think we're going to make a big time jump now, because here's what it looks like today. Every city that was ever built prior to this 20th century experiment in building cities was built in this complex, adaptive way. Began small, as a series of pop-up shacks, and then grew to something more substantial. Your city, my city, every city. And I want you to recognize what's going on here, right? When more and more people would move, well, think about this. as more and more people moved to the city, Brainerd, in 1870s to 1905, what would happen to the value of the land? Not the buildings and all that, just the land. The people who originally bought this land, it was in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't worth all that much. But the more people that moved to the city, the more pop-up shacks you got along the street, the more kind of commerce and things that were going on, the more the value of that land would start to creep up. It didn't have to go up a lot to have a radical transformation in the value, because it didn't start out as very much. At the same time the land is going up in value, what's happening to these cheap little structures that people built? They're starting to fall apart, right? They're starting to decline. That combination of rising land values and declining structure integrity creates what in the business we would call a redevelopment potential. Today we're used to using tax increment financing and other government subsidies to redevelop property. But in a complex adaptive system, what you see is that redevelopment happens naturally. That's how you get the incremental up and the thickening up of places. And so because the land value was going up and the structures were falling apart, people would buy that, they would tear it down and they would build something more substantial. That's what you see happening here. Now understand, if you were on the street and you went a couple blocks in each direction, what was the development intensity going to look like? It was going to look like this, right? That's what the far edge of town would have been, something at that degree of intensity. So if you were a poorer person moving to my city, back in the 1880s, 1890s, where would you have moved? The far edge of town. You would have had a small, modest little place. You would have been hoping that the place continued to grow and eventually you were closer to the middle of town. When that happened, you saw those structures change again. Because the more and more people moved there, the more the center of the town became valuable. And as those wood structures started to need a little bit of love, they were going into decline, enough growth had happened where people could justify, hey, we're going to tear down that old place and we're going to build a bank here, we're going to build a hotel here, we're going to build something major here in the middle of town where the land is so valuable. But if you went on a couple blocks in each direction, it was going to look like this. And if you went on a few blocks beyond that, it was going to look like this. In a sense, the complex adaptive system allowed a place for everybody to get a start, regardless of where you kind of came to the table wealth-wise. It allows you to get a start. And in a complex system, when you got a start, as long as you continue to kind of work, yes, a little bit rivalrous with everybody else, but also a little bit cooperative with everybody else. Again, complex adaptive systems have that facet to them, right? As long as that happened and the city continued to grow, what would happen is that everybody would, in a sense, benefit over time. Here's what my street looks like today. This is the exact same street. It's taken from about right here, but on the ground instead of up high. The street is today, half-occupied buildings and a cluster of parking lots. I want you to recognize one thing about this street. In that block, in this little block right here, 2 blocks, there's $500,000 of public infrastructure that we as a community have invested in that street. Add up the sewer pipe, the water pipe, the drainage pipes, the storm sewer collection basins, the sidewalks, the asphalt, the street lights. $500,000. Where is the wealth that we are going to tap into as a community to sustain that investment? When we have to go out and fix that road, go out and fix that sidewalk, where's the money going to come from to do that? That wealth used to be there, right? Used to be plenty of wealth to go out and tap. That wealth does not exist anymore. And this is the shift between complex and complicated that I want to talk to you about. We have taken cities that had this complex adaptive framework to them, and we have shifted them into something that is really complicated. And we've lost, in a sense, that ability to adapt and respond to stresses like this. Why did we do this? this part of the story, and sometimes it takes too long. You're all paying very close attention, but you're being very good. If you call yourselves Indiana, I don't know what you would say. Or you call yourself Hoosiers, wow. All right. We'll go with that. Hoosiers, yeah, all right. I'm from Minnesota, so we, when I think of Hoosiers, I think of your basketball team and your football team. I don't think of any state of people. But I'll accept that. You all said it at the same time, so like, how can I argue? So the Great Depression was one of these disorienting experiences in American history. My grandfather was a Marine in World War II. He was the first group in the Nagasaki after they dropped the bomb. So that will give you a sense of his age. He grew up in the Great Depression, and he really didn't wasn't eligible to join the Marines until near the end of the war, the middle of the war. So he wasn't actually mobilized and put into combat until very, very near the end. I talked to him many times when he was alive about the Great Depression and about the war. And it was amazing to me because he always talked about these things as great experiences, right? Like he would have these stories that were of his youth and were very interesting and very fun. But you could also tell that this was a very hard and difficult time. I grew up on the farm homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents, so my family's been in Minnesota a long time. My grandfather, for a variety of reasons, when he was a young boy, could not live in his home. And he wound up moving in with the neighbors. The neighbors, this is during the Great Depression, fed him and allowed him essentially to eat at their table. In exchange, he helped them work the farm. He slept in the barn. I live in Minnesota. Sleeping in the barn in the winter would be very, very cold. My grandpa told me that he felt fortunate. He was better off than many during the Great Depression. What I take from those conversations, or what I took from those conversations, was that the Depression was really hard in ways that we today have a hard time grasping and understanding. If you read the literature, people at the time found the Depression very disorienting. They didn't understand what caused it. Even today, we debate the causes. It was kind of a breakdown of a complex system. Nobody really understood what caused it. Even more disorienting, nobody knew how to get out of the Great Depression. If you look at the New Deal project was an attempt to try many, many different things and see what would work. We are all taught as modern Americans that the thing that got us out of World War II was, the thing that got us out of the Great Depression was, I screwed that up. World War II got us out of the Great Depression. Stop. Sorry. I got ahead of myself. The thing that got us out of the Great Depression is World War II. And that's what I was taught in middle school, right? We were all taught that, right? If you step back and think about that for a second, you recognize how our entire culture, the way we talk about things, is shaped by economists and economics. Because only economists would have a narrative that says, when we hit World War II, that's when the good times started again, right? Only a bean counter who cares nothing about human suffering, death, destruction, would be like, 1941, happy times are here again, right? But if you are a bean counter, that's what happened, right? We hit the war, we mobilized millions of people to go fight and to die, to kill. Horrible, horrible experience. We took millions of other people who were working age and we sent them to factories to create ships, planes, munitions, all this stuff that we were just going to destroy, right? It was not meant to improve anybody's quality of life. We rationed butter, we rationed gas, we rationed sugar, we rationed meat. This was not a great time to be alive. But if you were an economist, we solved the Great Depression, right? It's such a warped view of the world. As the war was coming to a close, and I think it's important to point out, if you study the two world wars, in World War I, it was not clear who was going to win until like the last 6 months. You know, we look at it historically in a very kind of different prism, but if you follow the narrative of the war, it could have gone either way till like the very end, really. World War II was very different. It was clear December 8th, 1941, who was going to win the war. It was very clear, the lines were drawn, and it was very, very clear, unless some kind of technological miracle happened, that the Allied powers were going to triumph. It was just a matter of how long would it take and what would the ultimate cost be. And so because of this kind of obvious outcome, the planners here in the US spent a lot of time talking about what the post-war was going to look like. And economists in particular had this big charge, because the thing they were most worried about was when the war ends, the good times in terms of the economy, they're just going to go back in reverse. Paul Samuelson, one of the preeminent economists of the 20th century, wrote this in a memo to FDR. He said, when the war ends suddenly, it would be ushered in the greatest period of unemployment and industrial dislocation which any economy has ever faced. In other words, when we demobilize all these troops, when we shut down all these industries, there's nothing different about the economy today than there was in the middle of the Great Depression. We're just going to go right back into the Great Depression. That's what they were afraid of. Is that what happened? No. That's not what happened at all, right? What happened?
Innovation.
Yeah. Innovation. America. Yeah, like we... I'm glad you yelled at it so enthusiastically. Because what we did is we created a new version of America. And let's cling to that enthusiasm for a moment, because I think it's important to capture the feeling of the day, right? You had just gone through the Great Depression, one of the most disorienting, difficult times in American history, certainly in the experiences of anyone post-Civil War, right? Terribly traumatic. You had just fought and defeated two empire powers around the world in kind of the most triumphant way imaginable. The United States was the only industrial power not decimated by war. We literally had the world's gold, right? They sent it to us so that we would give them all the things they needed to fight. We were the richest power in the world. We were the most powerful power in the world. We dropped the bomb, for crying out loud. We were the only nuclear or atomic power, I guess, at that time. We had more oil coming out of the ground than Saudi Arabia. We had the world's reserve currency. We had tons and tons of land. And I think this is really important given where we're at today as a society. We had a culture that was united against common enemies. Do you remember that feeling on September 11, 2001? Or on September 12, 2001? When we all held hands and were in this together? They had that for 5 years. So when we got back and we said, we're going to take all this capacity we have and we're going to pour it into a new version of America, one that will generate prosperity for all, one that will create a huge middle class, one that will create jobs and growth and economic development and keep us out of the Great Depression. This was not a hard sell, right? In fact, today, we still nostalgize this couple of decades after World War II that, well, let me say this. For those of you that know yourself to be very partisan people, which I'm sure there's some in this room, dial it down just for a moment, because what I'm going to say next is not a partisan observation. I don't want you to be triggered into a partisan reaction. If we go back to the 2016 presidential election, remember that one? Of course you remember that one, right? as I looked at that election, as I lived through it, what I was hearing were two 70-ish-year-old candidates describing for us the best couple of decades of their life and how they were going to recreate that for us today. Whether that was a vision of Aussie inherent families and blue-collar jobs, or whether that was a vision of an expansive federal government that could do all kinds of things to make people's lives better. Those two candidates were describing essentially their childhood, the couple of decades right after World War II, where everything was so easy and everything seemed possible. This is a period of time we nostalgize and put on a pedestal today, because that was when America was this great land. Now, let me say this as a disclaimer. It wasn't great for everybody. And we can go around this community today and see neighborhoods that were divided by the things we did then, that were torn down by the things we did then. I always like to, as a practice, try to be as generous as I can about the motivations of people of the past. I hope that someday my descendants are generous about my motivations and our motivations today. I think in the most optimistic way, there was a belief that this prosperity would eventually get to everybody. But the reality is we went out and tried to create a new way of living, a new way of inhabiting the landscape. And we did it because we wanted to stay out of the Great Depression 2.0. I'm going to show you what this looked like on the ground, because let's be clear, this was wildly successful. People set out to do this, and it actually worked. It was amazing, right? This is the city of Fresno, California. I'm not showing you this because you are Fresno, California. I'm showing you this because I have great maps of Fresno. But they're going to tell you a story that I think will rhyme with a story you're familiar with. It certainly is the story of every city in North America. What you have here in yellow is the size of Fresno, California in 1897. And I'm going to go through time now and show you how that changes, right? So here's Fresno in 1909. Here's 1922. Remember now, this is that incremental development pattern, that culture growing in the petri dish, incrementally up, incrementally out, thickening up, growing more mature. Here's the middle of the Great Depression, and here's the end of World War II. You'll notice that even during Depression and war, the city continued to grow. The growth was modest, certainly, but again, there are ways for people of all incomes, big strata, to find a place to get started. So there was growth, right, in multiple dimensions. Now we're at the end of World War II. We don't want to go back into another Great Depression as we demobilize. We want to grow. We're going to turn our cities into machines of growth, engines of growth. It's very complicated. There's lots of things. We're going to subsidize highways and housing and infrastructure, set up financial systems, all kinds of standards to make this process go really fast. We're going to create this complicated growth machine, and we're going to apply it to our cities. And here's what happens. 1958, 1970, 1983. Here's the mid-1990s. The last map I've got is 2010. This looks familiar, right? My city, Greater Minnesota, at the end of World War II was around 14,000 people. Today, my city is around 14,000 people. It's 10 times the area. Same amount of people, 10 times the amount of road, 10 times the amount of pipe, 10 times the amount of area to provide police and fire protection and all that. This system generates a lot of growth, a lot of transactions. And if you measure success in terms of transactions, this style of development is amazing. If you measure success in terms of the wealth that you create, the capacity that you build, the prosperity you experience, is a very different story. This is data that a friend of mine named Joe Minicozy, he runs a firm called Urban 3 out of Asheville, North Carolina. I'm going to show you more Joe stuff here in a minute. But Joe and I were on a team that went to Lafayette, Louisiana, to help them understand why their city was broke. Really, that's what we were there to do. One of the data sets we pulled was about their water system. We recognize that at the end of World War II, their population was a little over 33,000. Today, it's a little over 120,000. So it's a 3.5 times rate of growth. Remember, we're trying to grow. Really, really successful story in Lafayette, Louisiana. They've grown by 3.5 times. Amazing. But when we look at the end of World War II, and we say, what did it take to provide drinking water for the people of Lafayette, Louisiana? At the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person. Today, it takes 50 feet. It takes 10 times the amount. What does it take to provide fire protection for the people of Lafayette? At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. So we can look at this and we say, okay, we grow our population by 3.5 times. That's amazing, yes. But it takes 10 times and 20 times the inputs in order to do this that it used to take. Well, okay, Chuck, I get that. Like, that makes sense. But look at us today. We're so much better off than the people at the end of World War II. We're so much wealthier. We're so much more prosperous. We have such higher quality of life. We have more cars. We have more stuff. We're just far more affluent. And the question that I ponder, that I ask, is where does that show up? Because while a city like Lafayette can grow their liabilities by 10 times and 20 times, but we look at family income in Lafayette in the same period of time is only up 1.6 times. When we look at family wealth creation, what we see is that more families in Lafayette, Louisiana have a negative net worth. They owe more than they actually have in assets. And that number has been rising since the 1970s. We've created an economy, a system to stay out of the Great Depression that allows us to grow very quickly. It allows us to experience increased GDP, increased number of transactions. But we have done that on the backs of cities. We have done that by giving cities massive amounts of liability in terms of pipe to maintain, road to maintain, area to provide police protection, area to provide fire protection, increasing costs, without creating the wealth that was necessary to sustain it all, the wealth that was required to take care of all the stuff we have built. I want to show you what this looks like on the ground, because it's once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it in a sense, but it is a little subtle because we've all grown very used to the world that we live in, right? These are 2 identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at these 2 blocks, you'll see that they're the same size area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure to them. It's the same cost to provide ongoing service and maintenance. They're in the same neighborhood, the same thoroughfare in front of them. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development on them. In the 1920s, as my city was growing incrementally, the next increment out were these 3 blocks here on the edge of town. In the 1920s, this would have been the far edge of town. That block you see on the left was what all 3 of these blocks used to look like. Remember I showed you the pop-up shacks from the 1870s? This was the 1920s version of that. So what you're looking at is like the poorest commercial property that would have been built on the far edge of town in the 1920s. And the people that built these 3 blocks, they would have thought, as their ancestors had for thousands of years before them, we're going to make this modest investment on the edge. As the city continues to grow, we will become closer to the center, in a sense, as more people move out on the edge. Because of that, our property will become more valuable. We'll eventually put second, third stories on. The buildings will become more intense, more ornate. That's not what happens. What happens is that these go into the 1920s. The 1930s, we have the Great Depression. Then we have World War II. Then we turn cities into machines of growth. We skip right over these properties and we start building out on the edge. These 3 blocks have stagnated for almost a century. On the right, we had the same kind of configuration. We had it torn down, and then we have the new Taco John's drive-thru. Do you know Taco John's in Indiana? No? Oh, you're missing out. You can think of Taco John's as like Norwegian Mexican food. It's wildly popular where I come from. Lots of mild cheddar cheeses. We were thrilled to get Taco John's, right? First of all, we got rid of a block of blight. All those old rundown, dilapidated structures gone. Now we have something that meets the building code, the zoning code. It's got commercial sprinkler systems. It's got ADA compliant bathrooms. Checks all of the boxes, right? We've got now lots of parking. Before there was inadequate amount of parking. Now we got plenty of parking. The sign meets the sign ordinance. We actually got the cars on the street off or on street parking. It's all off street. The environmental people showed up. I'm not joking you. They wanted some natural plantings, so they put back in this area back here. They put some weeds like in the stormwater area. The bike walk people showed up. I'm glad you're laughing because you're keeping me going. The bike walk people showed up and they wanted pedestrian infrastructure, so they put in a sidewalk. This one right here. It ends like right there. If you look at the checklist of things that we said make a successful development, this one checked every single box. Every single box. Here's what nobody bothered to look at, nobody bothered to consider. That block on the left, when we add up all the properties, has a total value of $1.1 million. The block on the right, it's the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure investment, the same cost to the community to provide ongoing service and maintenance. That block is only worth $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at that complex adaptive system, the traditional style of development, the way we built cities for thousands of years around the world. You're looking at it in its infant state. After almost a century of decline and neglect, and it still outperforms financially by a wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. It's not even close. And everybody in this room knows what the future of that Taco John's is going to be, right? In a decade, it'll be a used car lot. There'll be a new Taco John's up the road. At some point, we'll be looking for some type of tax subsidy to get it torn down and redeveloped. We've all seen this happen. I drove by them today. We have many of these in our communities. I want to point out a couple other things just because I think these are things worth noting. We went out and interviewed everybody in these blocks. Not only on the left do you have more jobs than on the right, but you have more local business owners. When we asked those business owners, who is your accountant? Where do you bank? Who is your attorney? Where do you advertise? What we saw is that they're all tied in to a local ecosystem. You can go to the Rotary Club meeting or the Lions Club meeting or what have you, and you're going to find people who work with all the people in that old, blended, rundown block. Even though it is a collection of tattoo parlors, pawn shops, et cetera, right? The block on the right, none of that. They might have a local bank that they drop money off and then it gets sent out of town. They don't use a local attorney, they don't use local advertising agents, they don't do any of that stuff. Now, I'm not negative on the people who own or work in Taco John's, but as a transaction, as a city, we celebrated this change. But what we did is we devalued our community. This is a really powerful case study, but I want to reassure you, this is not a cherry-picked example. It is a representative example of a broader trend that we see repeated over and over and over again in cities everywhere. I'm going to show you now a series of maps. These are maps that were put together by, again, my friend Joe with Urban 3. These maps show financial productivity. So if you think about a farmer spreading seed across a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where you get the most bushels per acre. So where in the city do we get the most value per acre? Where do we get the most wealth per acre? This is Buffalo, New York. I have a soft spot for Buffalo. I really like it. But Buffalo is a city that struggles mightily. Buffalo has lost population every single year since the end of World War II. It's been a steady downward decline. Yet if we step back and we say, where is the wealth in Buffalo? Guess where the core downtown is? Guess where the surrounding neighborhoods of that are? Despite the decline, despite the neglect, that area in the core of downtown is this massive repository of wealth. And it dwarfs everything we built subsequent to World War II, and it's not even close. We see this in cities of all sizes. We see this in cities of all geographies. When we look, we see in northern cities and southern cities, in coastal cities and inland cities that are on water, big cities, small cities, mid-sized cities, the same kind of thing. Everywhere where you have development that was built prior to the Great Depression, these complex adaptive neighborhoods, what you see is there's tremendous financial productivity, even when those neighborhoods are occupied by some of the poorest people in the community. And everywhere where we see the post-World War II pattern of development, what you see is a pattern that generates a lot of growth, a lot of transactions, but from the community standpoint, from the city standpoint, from the municipal corporation standpoint, you see diminishing returns. This is Lafayette, Louisiana. This map is not a map of financial productivity like these maps were. This map is a little bit more sophisticated. Actually, it's a lot more sophisticated. This is a profit and loss map for the city. This is a 2015 snapshot. Where the city is making money, where the city is losing money. Every place where you see a blue property, that is a property that pays more in taxes and fees to the municipal corporation, to the city government, than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place where you see red is the exact opposite. These are places that take more to provide service and maintenance to than they pay in taxes and fees. The higher the line goes, the more that disparity is. This blue area in the middle is their core downtown. There's a crescent of blue that runs right here. Those are kind of the original neighborhoods in the city. They're some of the poorest neighborhoods in town. I'll show you what this looks like. Again, I have a soft spot for Lafayette, Louisiana. I like it a lot. It's a great place. I've had some really good times there. But if you look at that picture in the upper right there, that's their core downtown. They would kill to have your downtown, and they would just die to have it, really. Downtown Lafayette is very nice. You can go and listen to some great Zydeco music. You can buy a really cheap taco, but nobody takes a picture of downtown Lafayette and puts it on a postcard, right? It's a place that really struggles. Financially, it's killing it, right? Financially, it's really financially productive and profitable for the community. In the bottom corner there, you have one of those blue neighborhoods in that crescent of blue. You'll note, and let me say this very clearly, the analysis that we did assumes that the city goes out and does the things that they promised to do. So they go out and fix the road. They go out and clean out the ditches. They go out and repair the streetlights. The fact that they're obviously not doing that in these neighborhoods only makes the blue line higher than when we show it. These are some of the poorest, most struggling neighborhoods in the community, and they are, in a sense, subsidizing the stuff that we see out on the edge. This is the malls, the big box stores, the strip malls, the drive-through franchise restaurants, the windy, curvy subdivisions with the cul-de-sacs. In Lafayette, Louisiana, in 2015, when we did the study, the median family paid $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. They would pay other taxes to the school district and the parish and what have you, but $1,500 to the city. In order for the city to make good on every promise that they've made, to fix every road, to repair every pipe, to take care of every neighborhood, to provide all of the services that people expected, mow every park, all that stuff, The median family's taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 a family made would need to get sent back to the city just to take care of what they've already built. That's not going to happen. There's like zero chance that that happens. And so what we see is that every year in Lafayette, Louisiana, they're forced to make a decision. Here's a road we'll fix, here's a road we're going to let fall apart. Here's a pipe we'll repair, here's a pipe that we're going to give up on. Here's a neighborhood we're going to care for, here's a neighborhood we're going to walk away from. A lot of times, people get it at this point. They're like, okay, this sounds a lot like Detroit. And I'm going to tell you, yes, it does sound a lot like Detroit. We're close enough to Detroit here where I think everybody in this room probably has some personal experience with Detroit. It's fascinating because as I get to travel around the country, I talk to a lot of people. Everybody in the United States has a story about Detroit. Everybody has an explanation for what has gone on in Detroit. If you are on the left side of the political spectrum, you have an entire narrative about what's gone on in Detroit. And it's internally coherent. If you're on the right side of the political spectrum, you have a story about Detroit, an explanation, and it's internally coherent. Those two stories do not overlap at all, except in one point. And it's the same point I get everywhere I go. We are not Detroit. What happened in Detroit is fundamentally different than what's going on in our city. I have the opposite story. What's gone on in Detroit is a preview of what is going on in every city in America. In the early 1900s, Detroit was one of the wealthiest cities, not just in North America, but in the entire world. If you've not been there, go. It's amazing. Go to their opera house in the downtown. You could pick up that building and drop it in the middle of Paris, and it would not be out of place. It's an astounding building. Detroit was so incredibly wealthy. And as they were at like their apex of wealth, they were on their way to becoming the motor city. They used their wealth to, in a sense, experiment with this brand new development pattern. They were the first ones to run highways through the middle of their neighborhoods. They were the first ones to have commuter suburbs where people could live in these brand new places and then drive in. They were the first ones to, at scale, tear down buildings to build big parking lots. They were the first ones to do this. And when we hit the Great Depression and cities all over North America were failing and struggling, Detroit and the cities kind of around it were comparatively doing really, really well. And so when we got to the end of World War II and we were about to kick off this growth machine and we were going to make all these investments in building this new version of America, it was very clear to every mayor, every alderman, every Rotarian, everybody across the country what needed to happen if you wanted your city to be great. You needed to copy the development pattern pioneered by our wealthiest city, that being Detroit. And that's what we did. We all copied Detroit. Detroit's like not a mystery, right? These are not people different than you and me. If you take a city, you denude its wealth, spread it across a huge area, and drive up the cost of providing service to that area, you get the insolvency of Detroit. It happens slowly and then all at once. I wrote this at the end of chapter 3 in my first book, and my mom, who had an advanced copy, called me up after reading that chapter, and she's like, "Chucky, this is a very sad book." I said, "Hang on, it gets better." I want to talk about how we think differently about this and what we do differently. And I'm going to tell you, I don't have any simple answers. I don't have any silver bullets. I don't have any simple things that we can do. Complex adaptive systems are messy, they're bottom up, they're complex, right? But I will tell you that we have within our capacity the ability to do things differently, to do things better, and to see amazing results from that. I'm going to give you a kind of framework to think about it, and I'm going to give you 3 examples of specific things we can do, recognizing that there are many, many, many more that we can plan. So let me start with this adage, and this comes from Silicon Valley, but I think it applies even more to us. Because we need to talk about doing things differently. That means innovating, innovation, thinking about doing things differently. So innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. If I ask you, how do you want your innovation? Do you want it smart or dumb? You're going to probably say, I would like my innovation smart. But if I ask you, do you want your innovation to be orderly or chaotic? You are going to express a very strong preference for order over chaos. We are an affluent society, and we have very low tolerance for disorder. If you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning. Your city is full of some of the dumbest traffic signals possible. You sit there, the light is red, you can look in every direction, there's no cars anywhere. Do you go? No. You dumb yourself. You give up your ability to act with intelligence because you have a strong social cohesion bond around order. If we want to see innovation, if we want to see change, if we want to see things get better, we have to allow a little bit of messiness. Now, I'm not talking Gotham Joker level of chaos, right? But my goodness, we've got to be able to loosen up a little bit. The marketing brochure of the suburban experiment is about stasis. We sell you a neighborhood that is built all at once. It's built to a finished state. It is idyllic and perfect. That is the marketing brochure. And then we lock in place from the financing to the zoning to the regulation to everything. Here it must not change ever. World without end. This is not how places work. So we have to move beyond in our understanding to recognize that places that grow stronger over time do so through a little bit of messiness, through a little bit of change. Let's talk about what this looks like. The first thing that we need to do, systematically across the board, is lower the bar of entry. We have created, for all generous reasons, right? For all good reasons. I think, again, let's be generous with people in the past. They were dealing with very real things, and they were doing it, I think, largely in ways that at least has some of their justification in bettering the human project. But the reality is today that if you want to get into a single-family home, or if you want to get into any home, really, you have to have a long job history, you've got to have substantial down payments, you've got to have money, you basically have to have like a college degree and years of working. We have created an abnormally high bar of entry to participating in our system. We need to systematically lower that. Let me give you some examples of what I mean. This is something in my community, we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same community would have called this a house. For some reason, we have placed the adjective tiny on this and made people who want to build this go through all kinds of hoops in order to build what anybody throughout all of human history would have recognized as a starter home. If you want to build a tiny house, something 500, 600, 700 square feet, you have to not only follow all the regulations of a house, you have to follow subpart A through M of the tiny house provisions. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to go genuflect in front of the planning board. You have to do all these things to build what everybody always would have understood as a starter house. What is a starter house? It's a small, affordable house. You build it and you occupy it. You start to create wealth. When you have a little bit of savings, you put an addition on. When you have a kid, you put on a second story. Your neighbor comes over and helps. You go help them. We nostalgize this kind of barn-raising ethic, but we don't practice it. We don't allow it. We restrict it. We put it off in little kind of odd spaces where it's out of the way and none of us have to look at it. We should be building starter homes in every gap, in every backyard, in every neighborhood in the city. We have an affordable housing problem. It's a very interesting, nuanced problem here in this city because you have both things that are very, very expensive and things that are very, very poor. But the problem that we have is that we don't really have a place for people to get started. People of limited means to fully participate in our system. Let me give you the commercial analog to this. These are some storage sheds in Muskegon, Michigan. Muskegon, Michigan is a very poor city. They recognize that they have a lot of entrepreneurs in their community, but in order for the entrepreneurs to get started in a business, the building stock that they had, well, they either had to build a brand new building, which is beyond the capacity of a startup entrepreneur, or they had to occupy an existing building, which largely meant retrofitting that building, putting in commercial sprinkler systems, upgrading the bathrooms to be ADA compliant, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to figure out if people would buy your candles. It was not working, right? So Muskegon lowered the bar of entry. They went out, they bought a bunch of storage sheds. They painted them up funky colors. They lined them up in a gap in their streetscape, and they rent them out dirt cheap to startup entrepreneurs. Like $50 a month, something like that. If you go there today to Muskegon, what you will find is that these places are full of energy, they're full of life. There's all kinds of crazy, funky people there doing really cool stuff. They try a business, it fails, they try again, it fails, they try again, it fails, they try again, and they figure it out. So if you go to Muskegon today, what you'll also find is that their downtown, the core of their community, is full of local businesses, many of which got started here and graduated to something more substantial. If we want more people to participate, and we want more people to participate, we need, I'm going to say this, and I don't think it needs to be said, but I'm going to say it in this room anyway. The most entrepreneurial people in our communities are the poor. You have lots of poor people in this community. And they're the most entrepreneurial people. And they're entrepreneurial because they are forced to be. They're forced to hack their way through everything. There's a huge difference between an entrepreneur and an investor. An investor is someone who has money, who's looking to put that money somewhere where it earns a return. We need investors, we want investors, investors are great. Let's never confuse an investor for an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who doesn't understand that they can fail, right? It's someone with an idea that they're passionate about who doesn't really recognize that, like, this could ruin their life if they go too far. We desperately need those people, and we need places for them to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail and figure it out. When we lower the bar of entry, we invite way more people in to participate. Second big idea there. We need to allow our neighborhoods to grow and breathe. We need to allow them to adapt. We need to allow them to display the characteristics of complexity again. I wrote this, Allow the Next Increment by Wright. It's a little bit of planner geek speak. What we have to do is we have to allow every neighborhood to change and evolve, to grow and to breathe. And the bar that we have to cross to be able to do that needs to be really, really low. We often say it this way at Strong Towns, no neighborhood should ever experience radical change. And no neighborhood should be exempt from change. Right now, when we go out and we build things, we use zoning to lock neighborhoods in place. We place them under glass. You're in a neighborhood of single-family homes, you shall ever be in a neighborhood of single-family homes. And what this does from a financial aspect is it caps the upside. And when you cap the upside, what happens is that you only leave two other options: stagnation and decline. And so what our neighborhoods become is this fight to kind of hang on to stagnation and stave off decline. More and more neighborhoods every year tip into that decline category. And I want you to recognize why, right? When we go out and we build 40 homes in a development all at the same time, or 400 homes in a development all at the same time, the people who move in there are moving into a pristine, beautiful, nicely rendered, perfectly marketing brochure neighborhood. And then 25 years later, because every place was built at the same time, every roof reaches the end of its life and needs to be replaced. All at the same time. Everybody's siding needs to be repainted. All at the same time. Everybody's sidewalk goes bad. All at the same time. And so what happens is that we have a neighborhood that looks great for a couple decades, and then all at once, it goes into decline. Everywhere. In the traditional development pattern, in the pre-Great Depression development, in a complex adaptive pattern, that would become, not only would you have assembled it in stages, it wouldn't all be done at once, it would be done incrementally. But as things fall apart incrementally, it becomes this redevelopment opportunity, right? I can buy that little shack in decline, that little house in decline, I can make it into a duplex, I can make it into something bigger. Now, you can't do that. You can only keep what you have. And so everyone who's affluent in that neighborhood does what? They move to the next needed place. And they look back and they say, wow, that neighborhood's gone all to hell. It was designed to. The neighborhoods we build today are like slash and burn agriculture. We just use it up and move on. And we leave behind this growing list of people who are financially struggling with that burden. We need to allow all of our neighborhoods to grow and evolve. And let me just make this very, very clear. If you live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory burden whatsoever for that neighborhood evolving over the next decade or two into a neighborhood of duplexes. Or a neighborhood of single-family homes with backyard cottages. You should be able to go to City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed permit to convert your single-family home into a duplex or to build a backyard cottage. You should be able to show up at 9 a.m. at City Hall, walk out at noon with permission, and start building at 1 o'clock. That's what I mean by having zero friction. That next increment should be really, really easy to do. Last thing, we have spent decades now in this kind of top-down capital allocation mess. This idea that it's our responsibility as a city to create GDP, to create transactions in our economy. It's our duty to take federal dollars and state dollars and build new infrastructure. It's our duty to work with developers to expand infrastructure out on the edge. Let me make it very clear. You have built more roads than you can afford to maintain. You have built more pipe than you can afford to maintain. You have more pumps, more lift stations, more valves, more systems than you could possibly have the resources to fix. The very first thing that you should do when you recognize that is stop building more. You should never build another mile of road, another foot of road. You should never build another foot of pipe. There should be no more annexation. There should be no more outward. There's no reason to. Every time you do it, you lose money. Stop it. But what this means is that we have to do something productive. And what that productive means is that we have to make better use of the things we've already built. We have to take that foot, that mile of pipe we've got and get more people connected to it. We have to take that mile of road and get more wealth and more property and more value out of it. That is not something we're used to doing. That is not something that there's a simple playbook to do. I'm going to help you get started. We have to have a development pattern and a public investment strategy that responds to how people are using the city. And specifically, where people are struggling to use the city. I put these pictures of desire lines up here because what these are failures of our public investment strategy to identify high returning investments. I'm going to give you now a 4-step process for identifying and acting on the lowest risk, highest returning public investments that we can make. Step number 1. Go out and humbly observe where people struggle. Where do people struggle to use the city as it has been built? I'm going to emphasize humility here. I am an engineer, I'm a planner. We come to the table as engineers, as professionals with a certain toolbox. It's very easy for engineers to see every problem in terms of infrastructure. It's very easy for planners to see every problem in terms of zoning classifications or permitting processes. whatever your profession and experience is, it's going to be very easy for you to identify problems in your knowledge set. Humility means clearing your mind of as many of those things as you can and trying to observe and understand where do people have a difficult time using the city as we have built it. Walk with them. Observe. Talk to them. Try to understand. Steve Jobs has this thing that he said, I've heard a few times. He said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a better Walkman. He observed how people use the Walkman and came up with the iPod, right? Oh, it's bulky, it doesn't fit in my pocket, I gotta rewind, it only holds one tape. All right, let's create this small thing that you can carry anywhere that holds thousands of songs, right? Go out and observe with humility. Step number 2, ask yourself the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do to address that struggle? Notice I said address, not solve. Complex adaptive systems, you never solve problems, right? There's always a stress, always a tension. You're constantly improving, churning, changing, adapting, evolving. We're not trying to go and solve this for all time. We're not trying to take care of this for good. What we're trying to do is take the materials we have on hand, straw bales, cones, paint, shovel, elbow grease, whatever it is, and we're going to try to make it a little bit better. Step number 3, do that thing. Do it right now. Don't form a committee, don't hire a consultant, don't study for 6 months. It's just a tiny, tiny little thing. Go out and do it. Just do it. And then step number 4, repeat that process over and over and over. We have built places that don't work for most people. We've adapted to it. We live with it. We have become accustomed to it. But the reality is that we step back and we look at where people struggle, what we're going to see is that there's an infinite number of things for us to do. Small, simple things. And if we go out and we do something, we identify a place where people are struggling, we go out and we do a very small thing to make that a little bit easier for them. We're going to find a lot of times that nothing happens. Nothing gets better. Nothing changes. I want you to recognize that you have lost very little. When we go out and we build $1 million project or a multi-million-dollar project or a huge thing and it doesn't work out, we make figure points and whatever, we're out huge sums of money. We're known to it. When we go out and we do small little things and they don't work out, sometimes we flip out, right? This is that chaotic but smart. We have to allow ourselves to fail in small ways, to learn what works. The reality is that we go out and we get good at this. We start doing this over and over and over. We're going to find that we will hit on things that work really, really well. And it'll be different in this neighborhood than that neighborhood because they have different needs, different struggles, different things they're working on. And we can start to iterate and start to build up and start to make things better incrementally over time. People will respond to what we do. We'll respond to them. It becomes like a dance. This is how we make the lowest risk, highest returning investments we can make. If we do this, and we commit to doing it, we do it over and over and over again, not only will we be building wealth and prosperity within our community, not only will we be building the capacity of our community to do great things together, but we cannot help but improve people's lives in the process. That is the essence of the Strong Towns approach. I'm going to share a couple things with you here, and then I'll be happy to take questions or hang out. We've got 2 books that are out. The first one is, I saw over here, you've got a bunch of them. Am I signing those afterwards? I would be happy to do that. There's a bunch of books over here, Strong Towns. Buy them local. We went through Wiley Publishing so that they'd be available in every local bookstore. So Confessions of Recovering Strong Towns, the first book is kind of about this talk. It goes into a lot more depth. Second book is called Confessions of Recovering Engineers, about transportation and how we make transportation investments. And the third one is coming up next month. It's about housing. I know we're going to be chatting a little bit with some people tomorrow morning about housing. But we're very excited for this one to come out. If you are interested in these topics, I want you to know the organization is Strong Towns. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We publish 2 or 3 articles every day. We've got multiple podcast streams. We're on every social media channel. And we've got lots of videos. All of this stuff is Creative Commons licensed, which means it's free to access, it's free to use, it's free to copy. I tell people, if I wrote something that you like, you can copy, paste it into your document and pretend you wrote it, and that's perfectly fine with us. What we are trying to do is share this message with as many people as we can. Again, I just want to say thank you. I've really enjoyed coming here today, sharing these ideas with you. I appreciate the opportunity to get to know your place. I see why you love it. I see why you care about it. And if I'm going to ask one thing from you, it would be to not stop doing that. This place needs your love and attention, and it will flourish if you give it to it. So thank you very much.